enormous number of plants that you could grow that could be classified as veggies, or at least things that we eat in main dishes. And in the fall and early winter, I didn't move into the late winter, so this is basically covering September through December. And it is, this is not actually all of them, but this is a bunch of them, and it's aimed at zones D to F. If you were in warmer zones, or if climate change keeps happening, you may get to the point where there's some other things you could think about growing. And something like, for example, cherry tomatoes, you could grow in the fall if you had a greenhouse or a plastic hoop house. But I'm not addressing what you could do in a artificially controlled temperature. I'm assuming we're talking about backyard gardening. The cabbage family has quite a few different species, the Brassicaceae, and it's important to think about these things a little bit botanically, because to some degree, things that are that are relatives of each other often have similar growing needs and similar pest problems and so on. So I'm going to go through some of the different things, turnips and mild salad greens species, and pungent mustard greens, the rutabaga species, and the cabbage broccoli species, which is the main one you see in the supermarkets. And there are a whole bunch of other stuff like that. Turnips, there are so many different kinds of turnips, and turnip greens, that 7 top there is one for greens. The Tokyo Cross there is a very good root crop, a hybrid. There are any number of different kinds of turnips. Napa cabbage, or Wong Bok, or Chinese cabbage. These things are a lot of amazing stuff. There's a Japanese seed company called Kitazawa Seed that sells a lot of really good varieties. Bok choy is in this group as well. Look at all these different kinds of greens you could be growing. You can't possibly eat this many. Then there are these mild salad greens called Mizuna, particularly. I think I need to get myself a laser pointer here. Yes. Boy, that didn't. Well, it's just not doing it very well. Anyway, Mizuna is a really good salad green in the mid-fall. And I like to use it then in the fall because of the fact that it will grow in hotter weather, certainly, than lettuce will. And so I generally grow a lot of Mizuna, but any of these varieties here would work. And this is another one of these. A lot of Italian, this is an Italian vegetable here, broccoli rab. Choy sum is a Chinese version of this. And then there's the mustards, Junsia, and there are a lot of kinds of mustards as well. Here's your seed mustard, and you can make your own mustard if you want to. Many kinds. Then there's Napus, which is rutabagas. Rutabaga has a lot of benefits to it. We'll talk about those in a minute, but there's some things that I have rutabagas in the refrigerator now in late July. This is another Napus, Russian or Siberian kale. And all these things are pretty darn healthy. Here's another Napus, rape leaf or yu choi. This is yu choi vegetable. This is a Chinese vegetable. This one here is the one that's produced oil from the oil seeds. Cabbage is an Asteraceae species. And this is a pretty astonishing number of cabbages. I still have some cabbage from that I planted last fall in the refrigerator now. And there are cabbages that will grow. This was done in Greenspoint years ago, but these are 4-foot wide cabbages here. This was done in Alaska, I think. But there are many kinds of cabbage. I'm not particularly fond of eating this one, but it's pretty. And these don't grow as well here as the green cabbages do. Broccoli is an Oleracea, the thick-stemmed brassicas. And there are many, many kinds of broccoli. Some of them are fast with big curds, and some of them are slow with tiny curds. And all of them will grow here. Cauliflower really likes temperatures in this range. And so you might say, well, my September is too hot and my November is too cold, that kind of problem. But there are some amazing cauliflowers. This is a third one, Romanesco. We didn't used to grow this very much because the old open pollinated ones took about 14 months to produce a head here, whereas the new hybrids are pretty much like cauliflower. And so they produce really well. Collards is another Oleracea. There are many kinds of collards. I really like green glaze. It's a wonderful collards. Collards can grow 4, 5, 6 years in a row in your garden. Excuse me. And this is the one you commonly see in the grocery stores and things. But there are many, many other varieties sold by Southern Exposure and other places. Many kinds of kales as well. This red boar needs a hard freeze to turn this color, but it is an absolutely gorgeous kale. This one, Brussels sprouts, you can grow Brussels sprouts if you get you have a light system or a heated greenhouse or something, air-conditioned greenhouse rather, in late August. You need to grow transplants because these things need to harvest when the temperatures are cool, which is going to be wintertime. But they're very hardy here. This is another Oleracea, the so-called Chinese broccoli or gailan. And this, you can get seeds from places like Kitazawa in San Francisco. Kohlrabi is a Czech vegetable. It's another Oleracea. I love to grow kohlrabi. You harvest this, the stem is right here, and you peel this stuff off and you get something like cucumber. And then these Japanese ornamental kales, they really like hard freezes and long winters, and they don't taste good, but they're pretty. Other species of cabbage stuff, arugula. This is the domestic arugula, and the leaves are like this. Those things grow basically in cool weather. This is the wild arugula here. And this stuff will actually grow all summer if you harvest it very young and keep a lot of water on it. And it's stronger flavored, but both arugulas will grow here at different times of the year. Then there's radishes. These daikons will grow in heavy clay. There are many kinds that do well here. There are salad radishes like this one and so on. Then there is this stuff here, different kinds of cress. And nasturtiums are not a brassica, but they you can eat the flowers and they taste sort of like this stuff. Then there is the garlic onion families. Well, here's the brassicas to just talk about this a bit. I really think these are one of the big vegetables for the fall. That's why I put them first. They love cool and cold weather. A lot of bugs attack them when the weather is warm, but not hot. You can grow these in the middle of summer. They won't taste good, but they don't get attacked by bugs. Bugs are warm weather phenomena. And they need to be grown mostly quickly in very fertile soil. And if it's not very fertile, it'll let you know really fast. A lot of them take about 3 months to produce from seed. Most of them need a temperature range about that in order to grow. And if you have some temperatures outside of it, like it's below 40 or above 75, that just basically they don't die, but they don't grow either. So you're losing time. If you got 5 hours every night when it's below 40, they basically aren't growing during that time. And if it's 37 all day, they're just going to sit there. But a lot of them are hardy into the teens. So you need to actually get these things right with your weather, with where you are. I find that it's really better to grow a lot of these things under lights on an 18-hour timer inside for a while, and then put the transplants out in late fall when the temperatures are regularly below 75. And if you get more than about 100 miles from the coast, you may want to use a plastic hoop house and just keep them in there. I want to harvest these things when the temperatures are in this range, not warmer than that in the springtime. So it's better to start early in air conditioning and harvest when it's cool than the other way around, starting them inside or something in warmth in the wintertime and harvesting in April or May. These are very healthy as long as you don't put a lot of salt and meat fat with them. They're way high in calcium, and they can be cooked in various ways, instant pot, pressure cooker, stir frying. I like to serve them with salad dressing or olive oil or garlic. If you are going to use salt and meat fat, I recommend about 3 times a year or something, not all the time, because they're anti-nutrients there, and you don't want to be doing that on a regular basis. Now, some of these species, mustards, Napa cabbage, turnips, these things get flea beetles, especially when the temperatures are warm. It could happen in the fall also. And they're really nasty. So you either don't grow them during that time of year, or you use a row cover that you either buy at a garden center or online. And that's Peaceful Valley Farm Supply there. Turnips are an amazing thing. They produce in 45 days, say, and you can grow 4 to a square foot, and you can eat the root and the leaves if you grow something like Tokyo Cross. So you get more food per square foot per month probably from Tokyo Cross turnips than almost anything else you can find. And what people typically do is they broadcast the seed on a rough surface of the soil, and then thin them to 4 inches, 8 inches, and then 24 inches. There's flea beetle damage right there on these things, mustard, turnips, and Napa cabbage. And they can completely eradicate these things in 24 hours if there's an infestation. Really small these creatures are. So either grow them, you know, November, December, January kind of thing for turnips, mustards, and Napa cabbage, or use a row cover and plant it somewhere where they weren't growing last year. And the row cover, you put a board or bricks or something here to seal it down, get it over there before these flea beetles can get in there. And water and sunlight will go through this thing and the flea beetle won't. But you probably find them at places like Arbor Gate or wherever, but I don't know if they carry it or not. This is basically just instructions for growing these things. Grow them from transplants. The buds of broccoli, cauliflower, and Romanesco can freeze below 28 degrees. So you've got to time your things so that you're not likely to go below that. If you have a big head and it's going to go below that, you can simply harvest it and put it in the refrigerator. But if you've got a little tiny head and you got 28, you either have to use a frost cloth or you're going to have trouble. So you've got to time things correctly, or you've got to use something like this for these things where you get the head. But the leaf and stem things are basically, they're not going to freeze most likely no matter how cold it gets. One of the things about the Asteraceae, the thick-stemmed ones, cabbage, broccoli, collards, and so on, is they're very heavy feeders. They're designed to grow fast and produce a lot quickly. So basically, if you start seeing colored leaves like this on these brassicas, it's a sure sign you don't have enough fertility. You need to use more fertilizer. If you're buying transplants in a nursery rather than growing them from seed, anything that's spindly or off color in the nursery, you shouldn't buy that. That's basically what it is. These things are voracious. They're like corn. They love fertilizer. With some of these things like the Asteraceae, rather than flea beetles and things, what you're going to get is snails, or you're going to get caterpillars. And caterpillars typically are on the underside of this leaf, at least they were, and they are eating holes through the leaf, whereas snails typically start on the outside and work their way in. One way to stop stem borers is to cut the bottom off of a gallon pot and stick it around there, and it will, at least in the winter time, they do this in the hot weather, it's going to heat this thing up. But in the cool weather, it's good, and it will tend to keep various things off the, you have to cut the bottom off of this thing, but it will keep them from being bothered. This is a cabbage looper moth. You can, the best fertilizer is a gardener's shadow. That is not a brand of fertilizer. It is an idea that you need to keep an eye out for these kind of damage. Usually you can find that caterpillar somewhere under the leaf or down in the soil somewhere, and that's what's happening. That's what's eating it. There are other kinds of caterpillars that go after these brassicas. Let's see, I'm running about 4 minutes late. Okay, so garlic onion family. There are a bunch of allium in the allium genus plants, bulb onions, multiplying onions, bunching onions, shallots, garlic, leeks, chives, and garlic chives. These are all different species of closely related onion genus plants. Elephant garlic is used like garlic, but it is actually a form of leek in terms of the species. I generally buy my transplants from Dixondale Farms for onions rather than grow them from seed, but you can get the seed and grow them if you want to. Here's multiplier onions, or potato onions as they're called. Here's bunching onions over here. It's another species. Garlic, leeks of different sorts. And these are Chinese garlic chives. And these are onion chives, and these are leeks themselves. All of these things, you can grow them here. So the question is, how many of them do you like to eat, basically? Here's your bulb onions. If you plant these things the right way, you could have lettuce down the middle and then harvest the lettuce and plant melons here in the spring, or you could plant something else that likes to climb. These are multiplying onions, potato onions. These split and they never get very big, and you can grow an enormous amount of food this way. They're quite amazing. Leeks will grow here and produce if you want to eat leeks. The thing about leeks is they're going to harvest about the same time as bulb onions. So the question is, how many of these things do you want? So I generally use 6-inch spacings. Garlic cloves are best planted about 6 inches down with their tip up. And there's a better description in the book on this, but use a iron rebar to do that. And you need to, the reason is you want to keep the soil really cold down there in late spring. And Lancelot is a very quick harvesting leek. I've planted some of the classic, like British leeks, and they could take 14 months to produce a leek. Then there's the carrot, cilantro family veggies. And group of plants, often fine cut. A&M came out with this carrot, which is high in antioxidants, and they're basically using their school colors. And one day we came up with this, and we imagined that could be a UT carrot. And who knows what. Anyway, universities could come up with their own carrots, but this is a purple carrot high in antioxidants. Anyway, they all have flowers that are like little tiny umbrellas or umbels. And this includes carrots, parsnips, celery, parsley, dill, bulb, fennel, and cilantro. And here are some classic carrots. They're basically named by the different shapes they have. The Nantes version here is probably the tastiest of the carrots. And there are a lot of kinds. The problem with growing carrots themselves in areas as cold as the Woodlands in the wintertime is they won't kill the carrot, but it's not, they don't really like very cold temperatures. And if you have a frost cloth or something like a frost cloth and some hoops here, you probably can grow carrots in the fall here. Otherwise, you want to do it in the spring. And this is in a hoop house here and so on. Parsnips are well worth growing. They're really easy to grow. I have a whole bunch of parsnips in the refrigerator now that I planted last fall. And it's one of those things you don't see in supermarkets and is well worth growing. They're a delicious vegetable. Celery, stalk celery, you can grow stalk celery, but you're going to get, every seed is going to produce a bunch of celery, and you are going to get 20 bunches of celery in the same week in April sometime. And the leaf celery, on the other hand, is very good for flavoring, and it lasts. We still have some in the garden now. You can use it to flavor soups and anything else you want a celery flavor in. Cilantro is a really great crop here. The leaf is tasty. This is it going to seed here, and the seeds are now known as coriander, and they will self-seed. The flowers attract beneficial insects. And here are some more members of that family. Italian parsley is really the one you want to grow, the flat leaf parsley. The curly stuff will grow here, but it doesn't last, isn't as tasty or useful. Bulb fennel is, it's in the garden even now with blooms on it. And dill is another thing you can grow. So there's a whole lot of these things. Without cold protection, I'm not sure you're going to get good carrots in zones D to F in the fall. You're going to have to plant them in the spring, February. But the way temperatures are changing, zone D may very well be able to plant them outdoors in October and do all right. And eventually you're going to, it's going to move inland. I don't think it's impossible to think about growing them without protection. Something I'd try certainly if I lived in that area, but I wouldn't, but I'd have a frost cloth handy for low temperatures. You need fresh seed for all these things, 1 or 2 years old, kept in a jar in the refrigerator at best. I love Touchon as a variety of carrot. It's really tasty. You grow carrot seed by just tossing it on the surface of the soil, then patting it in and keeping it wet. If you're getting something eating the carrot foliage, it's fall armyworms. You're going to need to use row cover, but they're really wonderful, those carrots. Parsnips, you need fresh seed. Javelin, I like javelin as a variety. It's really good. And you dig them up in May and they basically last in the refrigerator almost indefinitely. So you've got something that will you can eat a lot for a long time. Cilantro will grow anywhere. It'll grow in the lawn, anywhere where you drop seeds, provided it gets cool and wet sometime. And Florence fennel or bulb fennel or finocchio. Finocchio is a really good plant to grow. It's also fairly tasty in Italian dishes like spaghetti or something. Italian parsley, if you give it some shade and water in the summertime, may well make it all the way through till the fall and keep producing. And then it will go to seed eventually and self-seed. Now, stalk celery, there's a leaf celery, there's a variety called Kinsai. or Chinese golden. There's a French variety called Dinant, which is basically herbal celery. It's just used for flavoring. The stalks are not worth eating, but you can grow stalk celery. The problem is that how much of this stuff do you want to eat? But the advantage of growing your own stalk celery is that most of the stuff in the supermarkets is laced with pesticides. So, okay, so that's the carrot cilantro family. Growing the lettuce artichoke family. Okay, so that is another bunch. A lot of salad greens, chicories, endives, radicchio, stuff like that. Root vegetables, a bunch of things you've probably mostly never heard of. Sunchokes, like Jerusalem artichokes and stuff. A bunch of herbs and seeds, like sunflower seeds. That's a summertime crop. Artichoke buds. Bunch of stuff with, there's an awful lot of stuff you can grow here. So lettuce is probably the number one thing in this group you want to do. It's not going to sprout unless the temperatures are below 75 degrees, which means generally late fall. And you cannot bury the seed any depth at all because it's got to get sunlight in order to sprout. So it's going to be on cool soil in the sunlight, or at least bright area. It can't be dark, has to stay wet. So a cool spell in late September, October, maybe at night or early morning, it may sprout, but it may not sprout until November. And if you leave the seeds around without keeping fencing over them or something, birds may eat them. There are a lot of kinds of lettuce, an enormous number of kinds. And most of them will grow here. About the only thing that doesn't grow is a nutritionally worthless iceberg head lettuce. But everything grows here. Leaf lettuce is probably the most effective thing to grow, but most of them will grow if you try. And then there's chicory, endive and sugar hat chicory. These things will tolerate a bit colder temperatures and a bit hotter temperatures, and they're pretty darn hardy, and so on. And then there's a few other salad greens like miner's lettuce and mosh, or corn salad. Neither one of these are in that lettuce family, but they will also grow here. So there's a ton of these things you can grow. Aster family, this is the sunflower lettuce family, is also the aster family. This is Salsify. It has a root that tastes pretty much like artichoke. And this is Scorzonera. These are all summertime things. Gobo is another thing you can grow. I've never tried doing it. The sunchokes. They're all a bunch of stuff you can grow in other seasons. This is a winter crop, though. Salsify and Scorzonera, if you want to grow it. There's, in the late winter, you can grow peas, winter peas, English peas, sugar snap peas, so on, but that's late winter, and no point in talking about it for fall vegetable gardening, or even, it's not even December for Woodlands area. But there is one type of bean that you can grow this fall. That's the fava broad bean. If you've got the room, it takes about 100 days from seed. So they're going to be there for quite a long time. But they produce something like a lima bean, and a lot of people really love them. They truly love them a lot. And They're stiff stems. They don't need a trellis. So if you've got the room, this is something you can do. They will interfere with a lot of your spring gardening because they take up real estate into about mid-spring. But they're worth growing if you want to grow them. Beet family vegetables, beets being one of them. If your only experience of beets is what you bought in the supermarket or in a can, these are way better. Beets, chard, spinach are the main winter crops that you could get. Chard, you're not going to be planting till about February in zones D, E, and F. I can plant it in the fall in winter zone B, but it's not something you want to be doing in the fall that far north. But beets have a lot of benefits. You can start, if you're growing small numbers of them, you can grow them as transplants, and they do much better as transplants than as seeds planted in the garden because they get an early start and they get big. And they make advantage of the temperatures that way. There are all kinds of beets. This is a 45-day, 50-day, 60-day type quick beet. This is 48 days Merlin. Bull's blood is often grown for small salad plants. Anyway, there are a lot of different kinds. This is golden, which is delicious, and this is a more refined version of it, touchstone. And this is Kyoja, which I find is really a favorite of mine. It some years doesn't produce very well, but it is really, really delicious, and it produces good greens. Really pretty. It loses a lot of this beautiful color when you cook it, but as a garnish, it's good, but I don't like raw beets. So anyway, it's a good, really good one to grow. They bruminate really easily, but they like these temperatures a lot. So if you go too late in the spring, basically around March 16th, once you get over 12 hours, they stop growing the roots. So you need to basically get them done by then. And they aren't going to grow roots before that date either. That's because of sunlight. They don't grow below 40 and can die just below 20. So this is what they like. Beet greens are way, by the time you cook them, they're about as tasty as spinach, and they're much easier to grow than spinach. But speaking of spinach, the colder your winter is, the easier it is to grow spinach. They grow best at 68 degrees. They will not really grow unless you are below this temperature. So you cannot plant them too early in the fall, but they are relatively quick to harvest if your temperatures cooperate. This is not, Southeast Texas, not a good spinach growing area. They do really well on California coast and places like that, but they're not really happy here. But you can grow it. One of the things to do is to get the seeds started, and they're hard to get started unless you have cold temperatures. So people suggest putting them in a damp paper towel, stick them in a zip bag, and keep them there for 12 days, then plant the seeds. And then once the temperatures get hotter than about 70 mid 75 or so, the only thing you could do is put up some shade cloth or something. And I'm not a big fan of spinach here because I like a brand of chard called Herbet, which is much easier to grow than spinach, but it isn't going to do well in your zones until spring. Then there's the mint family herbs. And I grow mint. Mint will, if you give it water and a good soil, it will spread. So you have to surround it with weed block or something else to keep it from spreading. But and spearmint's by far the easiest mint that I find to grow and keep going. But it is really valuable in salads. I like it in salads, and in the summertime, it's probably the only salad green almost you can find. So oregano is another one that you can grow fairly easily. The Greek oregano is fairly easy to grow if you keep it watered in a raised bed. And rosemary you shouldn't be irrigating rosemary. But rosemary will grow into a sizable bush here without much trouble. It pretty much loves our area. So that's a summary of a bunch of stuff that you can grow. I know I went through this really fast. The book I have goes into a lot of detail on how to grow each of these things and different varieties and so on and so on. But in a 3-hour class, it's pretty hard to cover the entire gamut of fall gardening. So there's a lot of different questions I'm sure you have. Here is a planting schedule. If you have an ability to photograph it or screen capture it, might be easiest way to get that. I don't suppose you're going to memorize it or anything, but I put this together for zones D, E, and F. This is fall zones D, E, and F, September to November. This just gets you down A through L. And all of this is seeds unless it says plants. And this is the second page of that. So there's a lot of stuff you could grow. And there are actually a few other things you could grow, but they're so minor that I didn't think there was enough time to really talk about them, so I didn't. But there's a lot of stuff you can grow. And you can see that some of them, zones D through F, mid-November. Mosh, for example, is corn salad. D through F, mid-November. Where I am, I can't plant it till December. It just, I'm too warm in mid-November. But Napa cabbage, you can see that zone D is a bit different from zones E and F. And that's because E and F get colder in November than does zone D. So, and bulb onions, November, I'm not sure that you're likely to produce well with E and F bulb onions. I don't know that, but looking at the temperature needs of the plant and how long it needs to be there, it looks to me like they might have some struggles if you planted them this fall. So I have no idea what the answer to that is, to be honest. And these are December planted things. All of these are possible for December in your zones. This is zone D. Daikon radish should do all right, all the zones. That's the vegetable radish rather than the salad radish. So I've done this in 3 hours. We do the whole set of vegetables for the year in a 25-hour class at Urban Harvest. And we do that every January to May. I'm pretty sure by now that it's going to be a virtual class because they're not going to be in-person classes. So you may want to register through Urban Harvest for that class, where we talk about a lot of this in way more detail. I also on the board of OBA, Organic Horticulture Benefits Alliance, and we talk about a bunch of topics. We've been doing virtual talks, and they're for generally pretty experienced organic gardeners. And so they're not going to teach you the basics of vegetable gardening, but they're going to teach you some stuff that might be useful. I really like to garden. I think it's a great thing. You get salad too, and that's really good for your health. And look at that. I got to the end pretty much on time, which is, I know, I'm sure that you have a view that you're, I'm sure that you have a view that I left a lot out, which I certainly did. Anytime in the 25-hour class, I spend about an hour or so talking about the cabbage family, or maybe an hour and a half. And I can't possibly do that here. An hour and a half on cabbage would have meant no time at all on anything else. So let's open it for questions. And
okay, we're ready. The first question is, if compost is added each year to a raised bed, could you plant the same vegetable in the same space?
Well, the reasons for rotating crops, for moving them, are several fold, okay? One of the concerns is that microbes that attack the plant, like, for example, certain fungus diseases that attack members of the tomato family, let's say, some of those microbes will be there in the soil next year, say, that kind of consideration. And if you have a very good soil food web, it's possible that you could keep those tomatoes growing there year after year after year. And in fact, I know soil food web expert Elaine Ingham told me that you don't have to rotate for soil diseases if you have a sufficiently good soil food web. Nobody rotates in a forest or prairie. They just grow there year after year. And so nature can deal with the problem. Now, on the other hand, there are plenty of things that crawl onto plants and eat their leaves. And things that crawl will have more trouble finding it if you move it to another bed next year. Flea beetles, for example. So that would be a reason for compost isn't going to affect that. Most likely. I don't know. There might be some microbe that attacks flea beetles in the soil, but maybe not. And there are other reasons too. Certain plants like corn, for example, take a lot of nutrients out of the soil. And certain plants like beans don't. So there may be some advantage to replacing corn with beans or beans with corn. And so there are many reasons why you might do that. Also, there's an issue of shade. If you've got 3 beds and some of them are shaded in the winter, that might be an issue too. So there are many reasons, and there's a whole section in my book on how to figure out your planning of where to put things. But the short answer is, if you have a small garden and you just want to plant the same thing every year there, that's what you have. And you could do that, and compost would help you.
Thank you. The next question is, how easy is it to grow vegetables in containers?
Well, vegetables are a lot easier to grow in containers than are fruit trees, I can tell you that. And the answer is that by and large, anything in a pot is harder to grow than in the ground. If you're talking about maturing it in a plot. What happens is, when you plant something in a pot, you are responsible for getting the right amount of water there and the right amount of nutrients. And you're the one substituting yourself for nature. It's harder to do if you're using city water that's been treated to water these things. And mind you, the soil doesn't have any reservoir from the rest of the yard. So in the ground outside, water is going to come from groundwater. But in your pot, you're going to be hose watering it from something. And so you could get it too wet, too dry. Both are really bad on plants. You could build up salt residues in the soil. So your question of soil is a problem. If you're going to do it, get the highest quality soil you can get in the largest pot you can do it, and use drip irrigation.
Thank you.
Okay.
The next question is, what flowers would you suggest that would attract beneficial insects?
Well, if we're talking about nectar plants for beneficial insects, members of the carrot family, when they bloom, like cilantro and fennel, are the 2 easiest ones, but dill and carrots. Italian parsley blooms every year for me, so does cilantro, so does fennel, a bulb fennel. Celery does also, cutting celery blooms every year. So all of those are really outstanding for attracting parasitic wasps. Buckwheat does it in the summertime to attract taconid flies, which are really valuable. And there's members of the daisy family and the mint family. So when oregano is blooming or mint is blooming, it attracts beneficials. The daisy family is lettuce family, aster family. So almost any kind of daisy does that. The sunflowers do it. Goldenrod is an outstanding one of that. People think goldenrod causes allergies, but it doesn't. It comes out at the same time as whatever that is, ragweed and golden, those things bloom at the same time, but that's a valuable plant too.
Thank you. Another question is, can you grow pole beans successfully in the fall?
Yeah, there's a good question. The answer is that pole beans need a certain period of time. Let me look this thing up in my book. And there's this, I always say there's a question between can and is it wise? But, you know, you can walk to San Antonio, but I wouldn't recommend it. Snap beans basically grow between 50 and 80 degrees. They die at 32. So if you're talking about zones D, E, and F, you are saying, well, they aren't going to grow when the temperatures are above 80, and they aren't going to grow when the temperatures are below 50. So do you have 2 months in that range between 80 and 50? So if you think you do, then the answer is you could get them to fruit, pole beans.
Thank you.
Well, there's one more fact, is that I like to eat pole beans for about 2 months after they start fruiting. So then we're talking about 4 months. And the broad answer is in the fall, you're not going to get anything like 4 months between 50 and 80, especially in zones D, E, and F. So their spring crop is what I would say. But you could certainly in a hoop house, you might be able to do it or something like that.
Thank you. What fall tomato varieties would you recommend?
I don't recommend tomatoes for zones D, E, and F at the present time. If you're going to grow fall tomatoes, large plants need to be put out probably around September 1st or mid-September. Large plants, they need to be shaded for about 2 weeks, and they should be cherry tomatoes only, nothing larger than cherry tomatoes. The reason is that they have lots of flowers on cherry tomatoes, and you need to have lots of flowers when temperatures get right for pollination. And the fall, it's much harder to predict when the temperatures will be right than it is in the spring. So,
thank you.
Okay.
Another question is, what are the best sources for vegetable seeds for zone 8B, either online or local sources?
Well, I don't use the term 8B because the USDA zones are way out of date. They're based on averages between 1980 and 2010. And they're based on average temperature of the lowest temperature in the winter. So for vegetables, I think it might be useful if you lived in Milwaukee, but I don't think it's a valuable thing to think about here. But the question, tell me the question again about the zone. Oh yes, where's the good seed sources?
Yes, vegetable seeds.
Well, there are a lot of great vegetable seed sources. Johnny's Seeds in Maine is a really good source of vegetables. Territorial Seed in Oregon is a really good source of vegetable seed. It really depends what you're looking for. In my book, it recommends a lot of different seed sources for different kinds of seeds. Southern Exposure Seed Exchange has some really interesting southern or adapted crops that are well worth looking at. The Kitazawa in San Francisco Bay Area has got a really good set of Asian vegetables. So it really depends a lot, but it's not particularly for zone 8B. Those folks are not in zone 8B, but it's more that you need to know what plants are likely to grow in 8B and then buy seeds attached to that. So I don't know a good way of saying that. But D, E, and F, 8B is probably Conroe or somewhere like that, according to the classic maps. Conroe does not average 18 degrees every winter anymore. It averages about 22. It's in 9A. So you have to be in Madisonville or somewhere or other probably to be really in 8B at this point.
Thank you. That's great information.
Yeah.
When working in a raised vegetable bed, should you work compost into the soil or apply it to the top of the bed?
Well, let's see, that's an interesting question. You don't want to be disturbing the soil food web. The big value of compost, particularly since it's highly digested organic matter, is that it's really full of beneficial microbes. And so there is some value. I think what I'd like to do is put them on the surface of the soil and then put a mulch on top of it. You could lightly dig it into the top inch of the soil, but a highest thing would be to lay it on top and then add some mulch to the top of that, a quality mulch.
All right, thank you. Another question is, when gardening in a raised bed and you have a big weed issue, what is the best way to control the weeds?
Big weed issue, huh? Well, that's another thing I talk about in my book. The best effort is to not have a big weed issue in the first place by keeping at it weekly. But that doesn't always work. But the way you can, the first thing is prevention. You start with prevention. It's a bit like this virus thing. The best approach to it is not getting it and doing what's necessary to stay away from it. But if you've got it, it depends what the weeds are. There's basically two kinds of weeds out there. Ones that got roots and tenacious and very hard to remove, and ones that are easy to remove. If you're in the easy to remove thing, I recommend so-called gardener's shadow, basically going after some every week. I usually tell people when you go out into the garden, do something you like to do, something you don't like to do, and something that's in the long run best interest of the garden. Improve it, in other words. Those three things, or it could be during the week, do 1, 2, 3, something like that. But if you've got nutsedge or some other perennial spreading weed in there, there are various things you can do. If it's not too bad, you get something. There's such a thing as a digging knife that places like A.M. Leonard sell online, that you can pull out deep weeds with that and without disturbing much of the soil. And if you work at it, you can get it. Now, if it's taken over a bed entirely, generally you're not going to dispose of it by simply putting weed block on it and not growing anything for 6 months or something. So what you do to take back a used bed, a completely overrun bed that can't be weeded, is you either dig that soil out and buy some new stuff, or you take a tiller to it, break it all up, rake as much of it out as you can, and then plant stuff that is separated by 2 feet, like tomatoes or collards, and heavily mulch with cardboard and hay in between it. And you do that for about a year till you starve out this. And once you've broken the stuff all out, it's just got little tiny roots, whatever you didn't rake out. And if you've got cardboard over it, it's probably not going to make it through. So you just you can recover those beds, and it's just not easy. So some people would just say, take the soil that's overrun and make it into a hill and plant a fruit tree on it or something and get some more soil. But don't let it get there. When I teach this stuff in 25 hours, we have a long section on weeds, different weeds and how to deal with each kind. And the book lists a whole bunch of things and talks a bit about it. And you can look those things up on the internet and see what they look like.
Thank you. That was a great discussion. Another question is, someone grew cucumbers that were misshapen and discolored. How can they grow better cucumbers?
Well, okay, there's a lot of reasons for that stuff. Misshapen and off-colored cucumbers are generally distressed cucumbers, which ask something, why does a plant not feel well? There's a lot of possible reasons, but the most common one is you're growing it too late in the summer. They're a spring crop here and sometimes a fall crop, but they're not a summer crop here. You can get them into midsummer oftentimes if you planted them early enough. I grow a variety on tomato cages called Suyo Long, which does real well here in hotter weather than a lot of things. But misshapen is almost entirely caused by temperatures being too hot. And toward the end of the season, they tend to produce poorly at the end of the season also. The yellowish, that's just basically the cucumber isn't happy. And it could be caused by other reasons why it isn't happy, but most likely you're just growing it too late into the summer.
Thank you, Dr. Randall. We asked this question earlier and agreed to come back to it. Is a wall of water something helpful for fall gardening?
Wall of water is a plastic device that holds water in little tubes. It's fairly short-lived as a device, so you're ending up buying them fairly frequently, but they are a good frost protection device for a small plant. And the reason is two reasons. First of all, water heats up during the day and provides some heat during the night. But secondly, when water tries to freeze, it has something called a latent heat, gives off an enormous amount of heat while it's freezing. And the wall of water kind of holds a lot of that heat in. So it gives you like 5, 6, 7 degrees of protection. So for a plant that isn't too big, because they're not real tall, it'll, do a good job for you. They do really good job in terms of, if a plant can only survive 28, this thing could keep you down to 24, 23, something like that. So they have that advantage. A heavy frost cloth provided just for the time you need to use it might do a better job. People commonly use them for putting out tomatoes in the springtime. It'd give you an extra 2 weeks in the ground, which could be a huge amount of production.
Thank you. And now on the opposite end of the spectrum, someone had their garden damaged by the hot sun. Do you recommend a sunshade?
People use so-called shade cloth, and if you go to some place like groworganic.com or AM Leonard, maybe they have shade cloth of different degrees of penetration. And so you can get everything from gets rid of most of the sun to almost none of it. Shade cloth will help in our summers a fair amount. I use it mainly when I plant fall tomato plants in September. That's when I use it mostly. But it's a valuable add to it. I don't find that I need it for the things I grow in the summer, long beans, southern peas, okra, basil. Basil might like it. Peppers might do a little better with a little white shade cloth in the summertime.
Thank you.
the best answer I can give.
When designing a garden, what software do you recommend?
Well, I don't actually recommend software because the ones I've tried are they're really designed for landscaping, and I don't find them. There are a lot of kinds, and I'm not the right person to ask that question to. What I have done is basically take an Excel spreadsheet because I have it on the computer. What I like about it is that a lot of people have Excel or other spreadsheet programs. You can, I did it mostly for designing people's gardens for community gardens. And I can send it to them and they can say, well, yeah, we don't really want a bed right here by the picnic table or something, and they can move it around. But you can take a spreadsheet program, create a grid, set the grid as rows and columns the same size, and you've got basically a piece of graph paper. And then you can insert shapes and pictures on that diagram. So with a little practice, you can get pretty good at creating diagrams on that. And so that is an easy way for certainly a backyard gardener to do it. If I were doing this professionally, designing gardens, I haven't designed a community garden since 12 years, and I'd look and see what's available nowadays as well. I haven't done that, but it's easy enough to do on a spreadsheet program in terms of getting a design that works. But there are certainly plenty of programs that people use.
Thank you. This is going to be the last question that we have time for today. What is an organic control for mealybugs?
Well, I'm tempted to say there's the two that come to mind are chickens and toads. In that toads love the things, but it depends exactly which particular thing you're talking about, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there are actually products that work on that. But I'm not a very good at answering the question because I almost never see the problem. And it depends on what exactly is causing the problem, but a well-designed, ecologically designed garden that's a habitat garden, you won't see much of this problem. And the book has a whole chapter on pest management, but mealybugs is not something I have a really good answer for, since I don't really have the problem. I'm short of Googling somebody, that's about the Googling a question like organic management of mealybugs. That's about what I would try. If that doesn't work, I don't know what.
All right, thank you, Dr. Randall. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We are so pleased to have you with us. And Dr. Randall, you've been amazing. We really appreciate all your time and the effort that went into preparing this presentation. So thank you for helping us today.
Yeah, been my pleasure. Appreciate it.
Have a great weekend, Dr. Randall.
Thank you.
Happy weekend, everyone.